Hello everyone. Tonight we're diving straight into the kind of world where survival wasn't explained by science textbooks, but by beings who stole fire, cracked open the sky, and swallowed lakes whole. From a coyote who single-handedly ruined immortality, to a thunderbird whose wing beats sounded like war drums in the heavens. Two serpents with horns waiting beneath the water for your first mistake. This is the reality people once lived inside. Take a moment to like the video and subscribe though, only if you actually enjoy these strange late-night journeys into the forgotten corners of human imagination. And I'd love to know, where are you tuning in from, and what time is it as you listen? There's something comforting about knowing someone else, maybe halfway across the world, is settling into the same story at the same hour. So, dim the lights, pour yourself some tea or something stronger, let the room fall quiet, and settle in. We're about to step into the myths that didn't just entertain but defined entire lives. Let me tell you about the person you could have been. Picture this, not an apartment-bound creature wrapped in a burrito blanket, not an office exile with lukewarm coffee and a blinking cursor, but a human breathed into the last ice-age skin chapped to a shine. Bones ringing with cold, lungs tasting winter like metal. No radiators, no light switch, no mercy. Your life's headline is cold, maroning, nail-bluing, breath turning to crystals, cold. It doesn't knock so much as move in, lay claim, and write its name on your ribs. Morning doesn't save you, noon only softens the blade, and twilight sharpens it again. You crawl into bed, a heap of hides that still hum with the memory of their former owners, and hope your clan's heat will do what a fire would have done. It never quite does. Without flame, the cave exhales ice. You curl into the dense knot of sleeping bodies, counting heartbeats that are not yours, your sister's, your child's, the old woman who sleeps close because her fingers go white at night. When you dream in frost, drifting toward a warmth that always waits one breath beyond your reach. Cold in this world isn't discomfort, it's verdict. Night after night you gambled toes for life, fingertips for dawn. You tuck your feet under someone's belly, do the arithmetic of survival. How much heat can you steal without waking them? How long can you lie still before shivering shakes you out of sleep? You learn the body's language of retreat, blood pulled homeward, extremities surrendered like scouts lost beyond the ridge. You count by losses, measure seasons in scars. Resilience. Of course, humans are corks that refuse to sink. But resilience isn't comfort. It's the talent for surviving what should be unlivable. You keep going, cursing the wind between your teeth, bargaining with the dark. You chew meat so frozen it rings against your molars, nor tubers so sullen with starch they seem to hate you personally. You swallow anyway. Then you lie awake, hunger and cold bickering in your belly, while the cave roof hums with the slow music of melt. Your house, if the word can stretch that far, is either a bowl of stone, the earth left ready-made, or something you convinced from ribs, willow, snow, and hide. Caves are loyal to no one. Some are dry, some drip year-round, some keep the scent of bear so fresh that every shadow becomes a pore. Rock overhangs don't pretend to be homes. They are umbrellas in a world of knives. Huts' bone frames, hooded in skins, breathe and sigh with the wind. If you listen long enough, you can hear the shelter thinking about collapsing and deciding, for tonight, not to. Inside is not warm. Inside is less terrible. Stone remembers winter. It leaks chill the way old men leak stories. Moisture beads on the ceiling, loosens in fat drops, and lands on your face with the indifference of weather. The hides never quite dry. They keep a damp animal sweetness that clings to your hair and hands, and the back of your tongue. When the wind rises, the whole structure speaks in groans, a language of lashings and stitches, of weak knots, of generosity that will not last. Silence isn't silent here. Wind threads itself through cracks, thin as wires, and sings. Snow sloughs off ledges. A fox puts down 5 careful steps. Farther out in the dark, something larger tests the air, tastes you. Without the honesty of flame, you share the cave with phantoms, your own breath, your own fear, and the things that own the night. You huddle. Closeness is a currency, traded without pride. You know the exact geography of the bodies you love. The child who sleeps like a starfish. The hunter whose shoulder never slackens. The grandmother whose breath comes in a soft theatrical whistle at first, and then, toward morning, in a rasp that makes you open your eyes to count. Affection is not the point. Survival is still. Sometimes a palm finds your wrist, or a heel nests against your calf. and in that accidental kindness you feel the whole species decide, again, to go on. But there are nights the fire dies. You wake to a room that has turned into stone-throated winter. You taste copper in your mouth, panic rinsed in iron. You can coax flame from damp tinder with patience and luck and perfect breath. You can fail. When you fail, death arrives politely, dulling thought first, then untying muscles, then laying you down with an illusion of warmth, the fatal kindness of hypothermia. People smile when they go, if they go that way. They look relieved, as though the day finally relented. Children go first. They are all flame and no fuel. You wrap them in everything soft you own, and then you wrap them in yourselves. Elders are next, blood taking shortcuts, vessels shy with age. You know the signs. You know when to talk louder, so the old woman won't drift. You know when to say the child's name, sharper than necessary, and press your cheek to their lips, to feel the small proof of heat. You learn the liturgy of keeping, shake, rub, breathe, sing. Sometimes the mountain keeps them anyway. The cold doesn't hunt alone. It brings hunger like a quiet partner. Your body, a poorly insulated furnace, feeds on itself when food runs thin. Uncooked meat fights you. It's a job, not a meal. Teeth ache, jaw muscles burn, stomachs bargain. Raw roots are a grudge you chew out of spite. Fire would have made a feast of this, would have turned stubborn fibers into sweetness, parasites into ash. Without it, food is a debt you pay with more cold. Parasites come anyway, warm-seeking as you are. Lice thread their lives through your hair. Fleas discover the crossroads where hides meet skin. Ticks go to ground between stitches. You can comb with bone teeth. You can scratch until you spot blood on your nails. You can smoke them out with fire when you have fire. Without it, you carry your small enemies into the bedroll, share them with the people you love. Wake to a geometry of bites and the slow red grin of infection creeping from a cracked heel. The smallest failures grow fangs here. Predators study your shelter. Wolves right there, silver alphabets in the snow, and read your story back to themselves. Cave lions made of muscle and a very cold certainty know what you smell like when you're afraid. Hyenas argue with each other in harsh laughter you hear from the pit of your stomach. Bears are a rumor that sometimes becomes a roommate. Fire says no in a language all animals remember. Without it, you are a suggestion, not a boundary. Darkness, the pure kind that cities have forgotten, makes a black well of the world and lowers you into it. Your pupils go wide, your mind produces gods with busy hands. You become aware of how badly human eyes want a single spark. The stars look like a secret that refuses to include you. The night stretches an elastic you don't dare pluck. You begin to understand the first myths, that there are people in the rocks, that the wind is a person, that the dead wait just past the cave mouth to take attendance. Sleep becomes a collection of rents paid in shivers. You doze in small coins, not in bills. Segmented sleep fits the night, a watchfulness that passes from body to body like a torch you can't let go out. You learn the rotations. This one can keep awake until the moon slides behind the ridge. That one is hopeless after midnight, but good at dawn. Children learn to wake quietly. Dreams lose the difference between outside and inside. You step out of one fear into another and call it rest. Night used to be a workshop. When fire stayed, you remember the hours the elders turned bone into awl and awl into thin stitch holes. The way the light made their hands into animals. You remember songs with a pulse you could thump with your thumb on wood. You remember the winter stories that draw a ring round the clan and bring the dead inside it as guests. Without light, your hands are idle and your mind finds work it shouldn't, replaying the worst days, imagining the worst tomorrows. Tools grow dull, sinew dries wrong, hides stiffen, crack, confess there seems to wind. A spear point that needed a few licks of stone becomes a gamble between meat and empty hands. You fail more hunts because of what you couldn't see last night. Small inefficiencies float together and crust like ice at the cave mouth. The world punishes compound interest. Still, the day insists on itself. The sun drags up weak and white. The chores take their places like stones in a path you must walk. Fetch water that will try to climb back into ice. Gather wood made, reluctant by damp. Poke your fingers into snow to find the twig both dry enough and patient enough to burn. Your feet learn to read a river's skin, where it is safe, where it is treacherous, where it is pretending. The old woman watches you leave, like she is counting you into the world, and counts. You back with a visible relief when you return. Cold eats people in pieces. Frostbite begins as a lie-only numbness, nothing to see. Then the skin gives up color and claims a distance from you. Blisters stand like small lamps of warning. Black comes with a lesson too sharp for words. You become less able to be who you were last winter. Balance is a talent learned again. Strength becomes something you spend all in a single day, not something you keep as savings. Your hands, which were once a dictionary of all the things you could make, learn a shorter language. Pain, a companion animal now, sits beside you as you sew, walk, wake. Infection is an opportunist with impeccable timing. A scratch from a thorn you pulled for bedding becomes a fever-drunk mutter. There is no boiling cool bandage without flame. There is spit and patience and luck. If the old woman knows an herb, she knows it because someone else died first. Children are small sunrises. You notice their heat when they climb into your lap. You notice how quickly the heat departs when the wind finds them. You become extravagant with your own warmth. The work of the camp rearranges around keeping the smallest fires alive. Children folded into the interior of the sleeping knot. Babies slipped under tunics to skin. A choreography of sharing that makes a living bellows of the whole group. Even so, you bury. You learn the local verbs for grief. To wrap, to carry, to sing, to close, to walk home with your hands empty and your chest loud. Afterwards, fear changes shape. It is heavier. It is quieter. It sits in the middle of the group like a basket nobody wants to touch. The old woman wears grief differently from you. You wear it differently from the hunter with the wheat-colored braid. But you all hear the same addition to the wind, a tone that wasn't there before. You feel yourself pulled smaller, meaner not by fault, by fatigue. You audit every kindness against the price of survival, and sometimes you choose wrong, and sometimes you choose well, and only learn, which it was much later. Community is a word that only really means something in front of fire. Flame gives you a face. It lets you read each other, shoulders loosened by a joke, a mouth set hard with news, eyes drifting because the story has gone longer than the listening. In the dark, everyone turns private. A whisper hatches a suspicion. A cough blooms into prophecy. Your cousin shifts closer. Is it warmth or theft? You can't tell, and not knowing wastes calories you do not have. When embers live, you live more than life. You carve, you plan. You explain to children how a river behaves, how a cliff cheats, how a mammoth falls if it falls at all. Stories become rope thrown forward, a way for the future to hold your hand while it learns to walk. You paint, manganese for black, ochre for red, powdered bone for white. You blow your breath through a reed and leave your hands negative on the wall proof that you were here. A leaf-shaped silence glued to stone. Smoke lifts your words to the ceiling and smears them into a grammar only time can read. Without flame, language starves. The day is too full of labor to carry long talk. You spend your words on commands and warnings and the smallest tendernesses. Careful, here, drink, enough. The old stories retreat like animals that were never truly tamed. Children learn by watching bodies, not faces. By guessing at lessons you meant to teach and couldn't find light enough to shape. Knowledge travels slower. Sometimes it doesn't arrive at all. Yet you endure. You always do. Because endurance is a habit the species keeps, like a family heirloom. You move camps with the patience of glaciers. Sideways, down valley, up to the windbreak, into a crease of land that pretends not to be cold and keeps the promise for 3 nights running. You learn the secret tastes of the year. The spring thaw smells like iron and old fish. Summer, such as it is, smells like grass and animal breath, and stone warmed enough to rest your cheek on without grief. Autumn smells of fat and smoke if you can keep a fire, of wet fur if you cannot. Winter smells like nothing at all. Hunting is a group sentence with commas where you pray. You decipher tracks, the childish scribble of hare, the confident cursive of deer, the long, arrogant dash of wolves on an errand. You read snow, where it remembers a stumble, where it has been patted flat by wind lying about its intentions. You learn patience, a kind of prayer said with your legs and lungs. The weapon in your hand isn't a promise, it's a suggestion. The world decides. On days that yield meat, you bring it home like a parade low singing. Shoulders cocky with relief you pretend is strength. You share according to rules older than anyone present. The old woman gets the marrow shot and the soft bits that chew easy. Children get the sweetness of liver whether they like it or not. You trim sinew to thread. You choose a piece for the dead. When there is fire, the whole camp smells like triumph. When there isn't, the meat glowers from within its ice, and you think briefly, wildly, about rage as a food. Sometimes strangers come. They arrive like weather sudden, plausible, carrying their own horizon. You weigh them the way you weigh storms. Where are the edges? How fast will it move? Will it pass? Will it break you or the ridge? Trade is a conversation held with objects first, with words later. You admire a needle more efficient than yours, a knot you don't know, a song you can almost sing by the second chorus. You notice one girl's laugh is shaped like your sister's used to be. They leave. The world stitches its seams with human thread, and the places you've never been wear your footprints anyway. Injury doesn't ask if it may. A bad step into a pocket of air under ice teaches you a winter's worth of curses in a single thought. A rock shifts. A spear comes home wrong. Blood makes maps on snow. You wrap a sprain with bark and stubbornness. You dry meat while breathing shallow because a rib complains in a voice you cannot face. You watch infection bloom like a slow red flower from a thorn. The old woman names the herb. You chew bitter. You watch the fever make a theater of shadow from nothing at all. Sometimes you return. Sometimes your name becomes a place where the river kinks. Laughter survives. It has to. People laugh at bad firewood, at the hunter who slipped with dignity and became a story, at the way the old woman snores like a bear that can't commit to hibernation. Children laugh easily at snow found in a sleeve, at a beetle surprised into flight. Even you laugh, sometimes the good kind, the laughter that seems like borrowing warmth from a season not yet here. You hold it as long as you can, then spend it with care. There are good nights. The wind forgets the cave for once. The meat is tender because the animal you killed honored you by dying quickly. The old woman's knee behaves. The children sleep like punctuation, curled commas in a line. You have fire, and it is more than a way to change meat. It is your second son. You watch it think. You watch it speak, its vowel-less language. You feed it. It answers. A human can love a fire the way a fire loves a human, wholly, usefully, without shame. And then there is the keeper of the flame. Every camp appoints them differently. Sometimes it's the child too young to hunt and too stubborn to sleep, proud to carry ember in a bark cup while the clan walks. Sometimes it's the bent-backed elder whose feet remember every camp you have ever kept. Sometimes it's you, because you woke hardest from the winter with a fury you can spend only on this one task. Not letting the cold win. You learn the rituals. How to cradle coal in punky wood so it breathes but does not devour. How to sleep while listening to a glow. How to build a windbreak that doesn't smother. How to lay kindling like a promise you mean to keep. Fire changes your voice. You speak softer because you can see each other. You speak longer because the dark is gentler here. You draw the children closer and tell the story about the river with two mouths, the hill that pretended to be a mammoth. The year the geese came late, and everything else followed. You tell the story of the one who kept a coal alive in a gourd all winter, and became the ancestor of patience. You show your palm to the light, and it looks like a map of a place nobody has found yet, but everyone remembers. The science of ithacalories and the parasites, the collagen that loosens, the pathogens that die, screaming at a boil you do not name. You know it all the same. Fire makes food into more food. It changes the measure of work. It gives back time you can braid into nets, stitch into boots, invest in a child's clumsy hands until they discover grace. It is medicine and meal and evening school and theater and temple and guard dog and messenger. It is a door you can close against a world that does not care, and a window you can open when you miss the stars. Without it, you live. Humans are very good at living, but you live smaller, harder, meaner. Lines shorten, of life, of patience, of story. Groups without reliable flame become fewer, then rumors, then a set of bones. A future age reads like a failed sentence. The world edits, the cold holds, the red pencil. With it, everything opens. You get taller because childhood isn't a war fought entirely on two fronts. You get older because winter spares you long enough to tell what you learned. You bury fewer children. You carve finer tools and spend fewer lives to do it. The evenings grow fat with words. The paintings on the cave wall grow confident horses sketched in 4 legs that move like a single line. Bison with shoulders that remember the weight of snow. People who keep fire become people who keep memory, which is the only wealth the Ice Age cannot simply smash. You remain mortal. You remain breakable. The river still takes, the snow still lies. The animals still go elsewhere without explanation and return in moods you cannot guess. But now you have a bead of sun you can keep in a bowl, a language for warmth, a way to argue with darkness and sometimes win. The predators learn your line. They stop at the edge of light with eyes like coins and blink and turn away. Even the wind, faced with heat, becomes negotiable. One winter, the worst you can remember, you wake to a fire that almost died. A luckless ember, a sleep too deep, a draught. You and the keeper move like you are the same person with two sets of hands. Breath, twig, breath, careful, now, not too much. Give it a bridge of bark, coax the red to walk. When the flame stands, it feels like a child taking a first step. Everyone wakes as if a bell rang that only the body hears. For a minute, the whole clan is nothing but gratitude. Then the day rolls on, rude and busy as it always is. You will move again. You will cross a valley iced like a thought, skirt a lake that sings low-throated songs to itself in wind, climb into a notch between two slopes, where willows speak a dialect of green no other plant understands. You will teach a child to read the clouds' bellies. You will show another how to split bone long ways without wasting the marrow. You will invent a new knot by accident and then pretend you meant to. You will sit in the mouth of a cave with sunlight on your shins and think the unfashionable thought that it is good, sometimes, to be alive. And when someone dies, because someone always does, you will do what fire taught you. You will gather, you will make a center, you will warm what can be warmed and honor what cannot. You will send smoke upward carrying a name in it, like a thin, essential spice. You will talk until the children fall asleep in a spill of limbs, and then you will talk more softly so tomorrow knows where to find you. If you had been born there, into that long blue weather, your life would have been a series of negotiations with necessity. You would have become lean with competence. You would have learned the exact heft of a good stone, the sound of snow lying about its depth, the face a river wears when it intends to lie to you. You would have learned to love the ones who slept near you fiercely. Not because it was beautiful though, sometimes it was, but because without them your story ended before it could prove what it meant. And the truth braided through all of this, tight as sinew, is simple. The Ice Age did not select for valor alone. It selected for the keeping of flame. The bravest hunter dies just as quickly as the fool, if no one tends the call. Evolution is a practical god. It keeps what works. The people who remembered the stubborn craft of warmth, who carried embers in Wintuit, who taught the child to breathe on spark and not spit, who set a watch not for lions but for wind, these are your people. You live because they did not blink when the ember dimmed. So tonight, when you pull a blanket up and complain softly, expensively that the room is a bit chilly, you are speaking in a dialect inherited from those who bargained with ice. Twist a knob, a room obeys. Touch your phone, a room glows. You carry a domestic sun at arm's length, and it never asks you for bark or breath or patience. Still, somewhere under the habits of light, you are kin to a keeper of coals. Somewhere under your routines is the old vow. Stay, little star, stay, because this is the last lesson the Ice Age pressed into the species and would not let us forget. Master fire, or join the silence. Keep the ember, or become the story that ends before it reaches the part where someone laughs. Your ancestors learned that in the dark, with their teeth chattering, with wolves writing their grammar just beyond the hide door, with children sleeping small and bright as clutch-warm eggs. They kept the flame, they taught the keeping, and you warm, fed litter what the ember became. Across cultures, monsters weren't just for jump scares. They were the first curriculum syllabi scrawled in claw marks, warnings braided into stories that outlived their tellers. Before timetables and tidy rules, villagers taught children with shadows. The students were reckless and curious, the children who chased dragonflies toward river ledges and vanished paths. The lesson plan was simple. The world has borders, and borders have teeth. In Europe, a whispered bogeyman took any shape the dark required. Among the Ainu river spirits waited below slick stones for feet that forgot their footing. In the Amazon, jaguar ghosts padded through the underbrush of the mind, hunger amplified into parable. Different masks, same job, name the creature. Let fear handle compliance. A parent could recite topographies of danger. Or they could say Baba Yaga and watch a doorway turn into a line no child crossed. This wasn't cruelty. It was logistics. A scolding dissolves. An image bites. Don't go into the woods is a sentence. The woods are speaking with a joy's memory. When lamp oil was precious and winter long, repetition wasted daylight. One story saved a dozen lectures. Monsters mapped space. Rivers were thresholds. Forests were rooms with locked doors. Cliffs, deserts, swamps each earned a guardian with a taste for disobedience. The Knack and the North sang from water. The Kalupalik breathed under ice. Mabuja watched from mangroves. Children learned cartography as choreography. 2 steps from the bank. Stop. At dusk, turn home. When the wind lifts snow like ghosts, sit by the fire and stitch in silence. Yet geography was only half the curriculum. The other half wore a human face too smooth, too friendly, too near. Stories warn that danger also walks upright and smiles, that not every voice belongs inside the circle. The Pied Piper lured, La Llorona mourned and beckoned. Shape-stealers wandered between clans. The metaphor was mercy. It is easier for a 5-year-old to sidestep a demon than to pass the politics of raiding seasons. The lesson lands either way. Do not follow what you don't know. Night carried the heaviest chapters. Darkness removed detail and installed imagination. In the north, the flying head chewed the blizzard. Farther south, winter riders cracked the sky. Storms had personalities, tempers, and jurisdictions. Children absorbed a civic code of weather. The thunder beings are working stay under the roof. If the snow speaks, answer by being still. Monsters also patrolled the appetite. Taboos got teeth. The Wendigo wasn't a campfire clown. It was hunger's civil war turned into a face, a reminder that selfishness devours the village from the inside. Krampus dragged chains behind generosity to say, "Gifts come with work and restraint." Tricksters slipped between laughter and warning Anansi, caught in his web. Nanabozo falling into his punchlines, so the medicine went down without numbing courage. Children learned to hold 2 feelings at once. Fear enough to listen, humor enough to breathe. Shapeshifters honed vigilance. A fairy swap, a neighbor who isn't, a coyote that knows your name. These taught calibration. Read the world carefully. Assume that resemblance is not proof. Communities needed that skill. Trust keeps a fire ring tight. Scrutiny keeps it from being stolen. The stories were rehearsals for bigger dangers. Sitting through a tale was a rite of steadiness. You could cry, you could hide behind a sibling. Then you returned the next night and sat closer. That was the point. Practice fear where the worst thing in the room is a drumbeat pause. Carry that rehearsal to the river edge in spring, the trail in fog, the field under lightning. Courage wasn't the absence of shaking. It was shaking in rhythm with the group. Sacred places demanded stronger fences. Burial grounds, caves of ceremony, groves that answered in whispers. These were guarded by narrative sentries. Taniwa watched channels. Banshees patrolled the threshold of grief. Forest spirits kept groves intact by frightening away curiosity. Fear made boundaries portable. A story follows a child farther than a fence. Time modernized the masks but not the method. The boogeyman trades his antlers for headlines. The river spirit becomes undertow, safety videos. The shapeshifter logs in with a username and no face. Still, the structure stands. A boundary, a guardian, a consequence with a mouth. We keep saying we've outgrown monsters while briefing kids on stranger danger, rip currents, traffic-updated fangs. The persistence isn't hypocrisy, it's pedagogy. Children learn through feeling first. Fear remembers. A statistic evaporates. A pair of eyes in the hedgerow stays, so we keep the old engine and just swap the hood. Stories continue their patrol, gentle when they can be, merciless when they must. Danger was geography's second language, and monsters were its translators. You didn't need to explain hydraulic pool or predator density when you could simply say, something waits under the water. The details were flexible. The lesson wasn't. Take rivers. In the north, the Knack played its fiddle and pulled children beneath the current. In the Caribbean, Mabuja hid in the mangroves, patient as tide. Farther north again, the Kalupalik breathed under sheets of ice, promising that one slip meant a hand with nails too long to escape. The point was blunt. Rivers were not playgrounds, they were mouths. Parents didn't need to repeat warnings about undertow physics. A monster's name condensed the lecture. Forests carried their own jurisdictions. Baba Yaga, in her chicken-legged hut, sat just beyond the tree line, reminding children that trees could listen. In North America, woods whispered with voices that weren't voices, luring wanderers into silence from which they didn't return. The rule was older than agriculture. Daylight meant survival, night meant teeth. Wolves, bears, frost, hungreth. The list of actual predators was long enough. The monster was the brand that packaged them together, stamped with fangs for clarity. Cliffs had gravity, but gravity isn't memorable. So stories perched winged demons on ledges, or set witches pacing the heights, waiting to shove. Deserts stretched empty, but emptiness doesn't frighten like a thirsty beast does. Swamps swallowed careless feet, but the image stuck better if a scaled arm tugged you under. The monsters did what no lecture could. They gave the landscape personality, and children instinctively respected personality more than geology. Parents benefited from the outsourcing. They didn't need to shadow children 24 hours a day. They had invisible colleagues patrolling the periphery. Fear was a leash that stretched farther than any hand, snapped tighter than any rope. And when a child resisted, a single whisper sufficed. You know who lives out there. The rest was silence, wide-eyed obedience, and another night with the fire at their backs. But geography wasn't just rivers and forests. It was also strangers, the most unpredictable terrain of all. Outsiders, traders, raiders, wanderers, represented both opportunity and threat. Communities distilled that threat into figures who looked like humans but weren't, or humans whose appetites were worse than animals. Children didn't need the politics spelled out. They needed the parable. In Central America, La Llorona wept beside rivers, beckoning children with her cries, then pulling them into her grief. In Europe, witches fattened children like livestock. The Pied Piper led them dancing out of town. Among the Navajo skinwalkers wore borrowed skins to infiltrate villages, uncanny in their resemblance. The moral was simple: don't follow, don't trust, don't assume. Appearances deceived, and deception killed. Even family wasn't safe from suspicion. Northern Europe's changeling tales suggested a child could be swapped, a mother's arms filled with a shrill imposter. The cure was cruel, but the warning rang clear. The boundaries of identity were fragile. Watch closely. Be skeptical. Question what looks familiar. Monsters made suspicion digestible. Children learned that kindness wasn't always safety, that the smile of a stranger could conceal hunger. It was a heavy lesson to learn at 5, but a necessary one in communities where raids weren't myths, they were calendar events. Better to fear a horned creature than to hear blunt truths about slavery. The masks softened the horror while preserving the vigilance. Suspicion was as essential as food storage. Kinship made survival possible, but trust had to be rationed. Monsters taught that ration. They painted the stranger in grotesque hues so a child would remember. Circles protect, edges consume. Night was the oldest accomplice of monsters. When daylight slipped, the boundaries of safety dissolved, and imagination filled the gaps with claws. Parents didn't need to scold when the dark itself whispered. It was enough to let the story wander into the shadows and sit there. Inuit families told children about Kalupalik, green-skinned and long-nailed, humming beneath the ice, waiting for dusk to coax the careless near-cracks in the frozen sea. The Haudenosaunee warned of the flying head, huge and disembodied, with burning eyes and hair whipping like storm smoke, chewing through hunters on winter nights. These weren't cute bedtime spooks. They were weather forecasts with teeth. Winter kills, and curiosity feeds it. Winter bred its own curriculum of discipline. Food ran scarce, tempers thinned, and silence meant conservation. Tales insisted on it. Keep quiet, keep still, respect the long night. Monsters punished noise, punished wandering, punished waste. The message wasn't subtle. Survival required restraint, and restraint had to be drilled into children before hunger or frost drilled into them harder. Storms too had their personalities. Plains traditions spoke of thunder beings, frightening but protective. Children were told, don't test the lightning, don't wander when the sky speaks. In Europe, witches were said to ride the winter wind, hunting those who strayed. Either way, the same contract. The storm has jurisdiction. Stay indoors if you want to live. Monsters didn't just police seasons. They policed appetites, greed, laziness, disobedience. These weren't minor vices in subsistence societies. They were survival risks. And so the sins were dressed in skins and bones, made unforgettable. The Wendigo embodied starvation's nightmare. It was gaunt, ice-hearted, and forever hungry, the embodiment of cannibalism, the ultimate social collapse. Children learned that selfish hunger doesn't just kill you, it unravels everyone. Krampus stalked alongside St. Nicholas, rattling chains to punish greedy children. West African tales of Anansi warned against arrogance and hoarding, turning the trickster into his own humiliation. Every story ran the same experiment. What if you ignore restraint? The answer was always, you won't like what comes. Monsters personalized the taboos. Don't be greedy is forgettable. A hollow-eyed being will chew through your family if you hoard food sticks. The grotesque was a mnemonic, an insurance policy. Children who laughed nervously around the fire still remembered the warning when the harvest ran low. Sometimes the monster wasn't outside at all. It crept in, possessing those who lied, mocked elders, or broke rules. Illness, fits, misbehavioral could be explained as a demon already inside. A child who disobeyed risked becoming the very thing they feared. The lesson blurred punishment and transformation. Break the rules, and you don't just meet the monster, you become it. Fear worked because it was sticky. It held longer than a lecture, longer than a slap. It carved grooves in memory that adulthood could polish into vigilance. And fear, repeated, became training. Children learned not only obedience but stamina, the ability to hear horror and still endure. That endurance was its own rite of passage. Krampusnacht in Central Europe staged the ordeal openly. Chains rattled, horns curved, masks leered. Children screamed, then laughed, then carried pride in their survival. They had faced the grotesque and stayed upright. In the Arctic, listening to Kalupalik tales was itself a test. Could you sit still, control your breath, keep fear inside where it belonged? Communities rehearsed bravery with stories long before the wolf or storm demanded it for real. Fear wasn't weakness, it was rehearsal. Monsters were the stage managers. They set the lights low, let silence stretch, and measured who could sit through it. And when the child endured, the group saw it. Fear became public theater, proof that the smallest among them could carry the discipline the community needed. Some places weren't meant for children, and everyone knew it. Burial grounds, caves used for ritual, groves whispered about in stories. These were off, but fences rot, and curiosity doesn't. So communities built invisible gates, guarded by monsters. Among the Mbori, Taniwha swam in rivers and guarded sacred channels. In the Mediterranean, caves and springs were said to house nymphs charming. Yes, but also capable of curses. Pueblo stories in the American Southwest warned that Kashina spirits watched everything, ready to punish the disrespectful. Parents could scold all they wanted, but it was the monsters who made sure children kept away. Fear was a fence that didn't need mending. Adults, too, respected these guardians. The banshee wasn't just a sound of mourning, it was a reminder to honor thresholds between living and dead. In West Africa, forest spirits kept groves for priests alone. The rule was blunt: cross the line, and you don't come back. For children, the lesson was protection disguised as terror. Curiosity about sacred ground could lead to ritual disaster or just a broken neck. The monster packaged both outcomes into one unforgettable warning. These beings didn't just patrol space, they patrolled memory. A story told once could echo across generations, guarding a place long after the original danger was forgotten. Even as rituals shifted or sites fell into ruin, the guardian remained, woven into the cultural map, enforcing rules with whispers. And monsters didn't retire with time, they adapted. The boogeyman of medieval cottages reappeared in 20th century alleyways. River spirits now wear the shape of public service announcements about rip currents. Shapeshifters log on with usernames and false profiles, promising friendship, hiding harm. Fear still polices the perimeter, it just wears modern clothes. Colonial encounters scrambled the cast, but not the script. Missionaries recast indigenous guardians as demons, folded tricksters into devil lore. Yet the lesson persisted. Rules matter, boundaries save lives. The names shifted, but the functions remained. Baba Yaga becomes stranger danger. Wendigo becomes famine. La Llorona becomes a headline about abduction. Pedagogy, by nightmare, doesn't expire. Even parents who scoff at folklore still deploy its architecture. Don't talk to strangers, stay out of traffic, be careful online. The faces change, but the structure is ancient. A dangerous figure waits at the edge, and if you cross, you disappear. The lesson clings because fear is adhesive. A road safety lecture dissolves in a week. The image of something lurking at the curb lasts years. Children's media keeps the tradition alive in sanitized form. Wolves still stalk Red Riding Hood. Witches still lure with sweets. Tricksters still trip over their own schemes. Even cartoons wrap appetite, arrogance, and disobedience in grotesque figures, softened by humor. The fear remains, disguised in bright colors. The irony is sharp. We call monster tales primitive, outdated, crueland, then invent our own. Dressed in police reports and PSAs, we tell ourselves the creatures are gone, while updating their costumes every decade. The persistence isn't superstition, it's pedagogy. Children learn through feeling, and fear leaves fingerprints logic can't erase. So the story continues. The shadows shift their masks, but their job is eternal. To patrol the edges of curiosity, to whisper lessons sharper than lectures, to remind the smallest among us that the world, however fascinating, is always full of teeth. Long before telescopes reduced the night sky to physics and data, stars walked into human life as persons restless, radiant beings with intentions of their own. To gaze upward was not to study cold matter. It was to look directly at kin who could guide, punish, or intervene. The sky was a society, and stars were not ornaments. They had jobs, reputations, and occasionally scandals. Australian Aboriginal traditions carry this vividly. Dreaming stories placed star figures as hunters, dancers, or ancestors suspended above, replaying dramas that explained not just origins but obligations. The constellations were maps, not only for navigation across deserts, but for moral orientation. A crooked star pattern could hint at human misconduct. And it wasn't just the desert. Across Polynesia, voyagers crossed whole oceans by following star ancestors, whose names and movements were recited like family trees. Stars didn't twinkle vaguely. They spoke directions, announcing when to raise sails, when to wait, when to prepare for storms. The Greeks, ever fond of turning gossip into cosmology, immortalized their own in constellations. Orion striding eternally after the Pleiades. Callisto turned into a bear and frozen in the heavens. Perseus flashing above with his victim's head. Each star wasn't simply an object, it was a character trapped in perpetual motion, carrying its mythic backstory into every night. To read the sky was to read a drama that never ended, its cast rehearsing the same roles for millennia. But stars weren't only figures of heroism or romance. Many peoples linked them to the spirits of the dead. Lakota traditions described the Milky Way as the path souls walked after death, the shining points above as relatives watching. Polynesian chants echoed the same, ancestors lighting the sea for their descendants. To ignore a star's presence was to ignore the dead, a grave offense in societies where memory was survival. Personhood wasn't metaphorical. Stars could be fickle. They disappeared, reappeared, shifted their timing. Each change was interpreted, blessings or warnings, approval or displeasure. A sudden comet was rarely neutral. It was a messenger, an omen, or at worst, a celestial tantrum. Imagine explaining to a child that a flaming ball streaking across the heavens was just a dirty snowball burning in the atmosphere. Much easier and much more memorable to say it was a spirit with unfinished business. Stars were proof that the cosmos wasn't silent. They blinked, they shifted, they demanded interpretation. And in their company, humans found guidance, discipline, and sometimes ridicule. For if the stars were alive, then so too was the flame on earth, the flickering fire that demanded food, stories, and obedience, like any other member of the household. No one ever assumed fire simply happened. It was far too alive for that. It breathed, it demanded, and if neglected, it sulked out into darkness. Cultures treated it not as a tool, but as a gift stolen, bargained for, or delivered in great cosmic drama. The very idea that humans could control fire without permission was laughable. It had to be acquired from someone with authority. In Greek tradition, Prometheus snuck flame down from Olympus, a theft punished with an eternity of liver-pecking by an eagle. The lesson was obvious. Fire was power, and power borrowed from the gods came with receipts. In Native American stories, it was often coyote or raven who filched the flame, slipping past jealous guardians to deliver it to humankind. The Cherokee told of grandmother spider weaving a clay pot to carry the embers safely, a reminder that fire wasn't only stolen but also carefully hidden, fragile enough to require trickery and skill. These myths highlight a crucial truth. Fire was never neutral. It symbolized civilization itself, the difference between warmth and freezing, cooked food and raw hunger, light and endless dark. To possess it was to stand taller than animals, but that arrogance needed softening. Myths made sure no one forgot that the flame wasn't truly theirs. It had a past, a price, and a personality. Even the way people described fire betrayed its personhood. Flames danced, sparks flew, coals died. If a hearth went out, it wasn't simply extinguished, it had been offended, abandoned, or forgotten. Fire wasn't a lump of physics. It was a guest, volatile and hungry, invited into the center of human life, and this gift demanded care. In Zoroastrian temples, sacred flames were never allowed to die, tended day and night by priests who fed them wood as though feeding a living god. In the Roman cult of Vesta, the eternal flame symbolized the heart of the state, its extinguishing a national crisis. Across the Americas, many groups kindled new fire ceremonially, carrying embers from one year to the next, ensuring continuity. The ritual wasn't just practical, it was acknowledgement of fire's biography, its living continuity. Treating fire as a gift meant treating it as kin. It wasn't simply there to serve. It had moods, preferences, and consequences. And if fire carried personality, it followed that a hearth wasn't merely furniture, but a family member. To sit around it wasn't just comfort, it was communion. And so, fire, once gifted, once stolen, didn't merely belong to humans. It joined the household, a demanding relative whose constant hunger shaped etiquette, ritual, and even the rhythm of daily life. Once fire arrived, it refused to sit quietly in the corner like a polite tool. It demanded recognition. In countless traditions, the hearth wasn't just where food cooked or hands warmed, which was a member of the household. Families fed it, spoke to it, and feared offending it. Neglecting a flame was less like letting a match burn out, and more like starving a relative. Among the Romans, the sacred flame of Vesta had an entire priesthood devoted to its care. If it went out, the failure wasn't shrugged off. It was treated like a collapse of cosmic order. Punishments followed, because if the fire sulked into ash, the gods were thought to sulk too. In Zoroastrian temples, priests tended flames that symbolized truth and purity, shielding them from breath, shadow, or decay. To cough on sacred fire was nearly sacrilege, it deserved protection as much as a king. Even in ordinary households, fire received etiquette. In parts of Eastern Europe, people greeted the morning hearth as though addressing a grandmother, whispering wishes or apologies before stoking its embers. Among the Cherokee, fire was seen as carrying a piece of the sun itself, and so it had to be treated with ritual care, kept alive as long as possible. The hearth wasn't just hot, it was holy. This personhood also shaped everyday manners. You didn't spit into flames, because that was insulting. You didn't let them die without reason, because that suggested neglect. Feeding fire with wood or fat wasn't random housekeeping, it was ritual maintenance, the way one might tend a demanding guest who happened to be both essential and volatile. And fire's appetite wasn't symbolic, it was literal. It consumed, it grew, it punished. A neglected spark could sulk into nothingness, but an unchecked one could devour a village. To live with fire meant walking a line between reverence and fear. No wonder myths kept it personified. Everyone already knew it behaved like a moody relative. The hearth also became the stage for family memory. Stories were told in its glow, and in many cultures, ancestors were thought to hover in the smoke. Fire wasn't only light, it was witness. It overheard confessions, arguments, songs. If stars were the ancestors' eyes above, the hearth was their warm breath here on earth. Yet fire's intimacy didn't make it tame. It could turn suddenly, shift from friend to destroyer. And that volatility was shared by another presence, the wind unseen, unpredictable, and just as eager to prove it had a mind of its own. Unlike fire, wind never needed to be stolen or fed, it was already everywhere, uninvited and unstoppable. But its very invisibility made it suspicious. You couldn't see it, only its consequences. A tree bowing, dust swirling, a cloak tugged from your shoulders. For many cultures, that was proof enough that wind was alive. A restless presence passing through, breathing on everything it touched. In ancient Egypt, Shu was the god of air, literally holding up the sky so the world wouldn't collapse. Breath itself was seen as divine, loneliness it, and you returned to the silence. The Hebrew word ruach and the Greek pneuma both carried this double meaning of wind and spirit, a reminder that what stirred the trees also stirred the chest. To breathe was to share substance with the invisible. The Andes took the logic further. Mountain winds were living beings with moods. Farmers left coca leaves or chicha beer at sacred passes, hoping the gusts would remain gentle. Anger the wind, and your fields could be flattened in an hour. Similar gestures echoed across the Pacific, where sailors sang chants to coax winds into carrying them across vast stretches of sea. The air wasn't weather, it was a capricious companion, listening, judging, deciding. And wind didn't just shove crops or sails. It spoke. Voices were heard in it, sometimes ancestors whispering advice, sometimes trickster spirits mocking the living. When the Haudenosaunee described wind as a messenger, they meant it literally. Storms carried news from distant places, gusts announced changes in fortune. The eerie sound of wind through reeds or canyon walls wasn't dismissed as acoustics. It was interpreted as language, coded and deliberate. That same voice could be comforting or cruel. A soft evening breeze promised blessings, fertility, and ancestors' approval. A howling gale at night suggested wrath, a reminder that humans weren't the only ones who could raise their voices. And unlike fire, wind couldn't be contained. No priesthood could cage it, no hearth could domesticate it. The only option was respect. You appeased, you listened, you endured. This intimacy between wind and spirit also shaped burial practices. In some traditions, the soul was imagined as leaving the body in the form of breath, joining the eternal air. Death itself was not silence, but dispersal, one more breeze among countless others. If the wind carried the voice of spirits, it also carried their tempers. Gentle one moment, destructive the next. The same gust that whispered could also tear down roofs. And in that unpredictability, wind began to resemble the tricksters and destroyers that haunted stories, beings both playful and merciless. If the wind could carry voices, it could also play jokes. One gust might cool your face, another might knock the bread out of your hand, and a third could sink your fishing boat. It was charmingly inconsistent, like a relative who sometimes brings gifts and sometimes steals your shoes. Cultures everywhere noticed this unpredictability and gave it personalities that were mischievous, cruel, or both. In Mesoamerica, Ihicatel, the wind aspect of Quetzalcoatl, was treated as a masked, unpredictable being. He could clear the air and bring rains, but also whip storms without warning, as if reminding farmers not to get too confident about their planting schedules. In the Norse sagas, Engerd, god of the sea winds, was honored for filling sails but cursed when those same winds stranded ships for months. The logic was universal. Winds had tempers, and humans had no say in them. Even in daily life, their trickster nature was obvious. The same breeze that carried smoke away from the hearth could, in the next hour, scatter ashes into food. Children were warned that sudden gusts meant spirits passing by, and laughing at them might invite trouble. The world wasn't governed by consistent laws of nature. It was run by mercurial personalities who found amusement in human inconvenience. But the trickster wind could turn darker, shifting from playful to apocalyptic. Cyclones, sandstorms, blizzards, each was more than weather. They were visitations, tantrums, punishments. In the Philippines, tempests were tied to spirits, angered by human disrespect. In the Mediterranean, sudden squalls were blamed on sea nymphs, or gods irritated by careless sailors. You didn't curse the wind. You apologized to it, bribed it, begged it to stop. And when it refused, the devastation was written into myth. Entire villages flattened, ships lost, crops ruined. Wines were never abstract disasters. They were beings remembered for their rage. Children raised on those stories didn't grow up expecting bad weather. They grew up knowing that invisible forces might toy with them, punish them, or simply decide to cause chaos for fun. The irony is that this worldview wasn't far from reality. Winds are still unpredictable. Their small shifts altering harvests, storms, entire histories. The ancients simply cut out the middleman of meteorology and said outright what we still sense. The air moves as if it had a will, yet winds weren't unique in this. Stars could watch, fire could demand, wind could laugh, but all three blurred into a single truth. Natural forces behaved like beings, and beings demanded ritual respect, which meant that fire, wind, and stars weren't elements at all. They were personalities that humans had to live with. At some point, the distinction between element and person blurred so completely that no one bothered separating them. Stars weren't just points of light behaving like ancestors, they were ancestors. Fire wasn't a metaphorical guest at the hearth, it was a guest, a relative with an appetite. Wind wasn't like a trickster, it was the trickster. The line modern minds insist on drawing between human and nature, metaphor and fact, wasn't there. To live with the cosmos meant treating it like company. Australian Aboriginal traditions describe stars as figures who once walked the earth, their movements above reflecting dramas that continue to play out. The Andean wind, gusting down valleys, was treated like the passing of a neighbor, whose mood you could feel in the pressure on your skin. Among the Maya, fire altars weren't symbolic, they were mouths fed with offerings, literal participants in ritual. Every culture carried its own version of this blending, not because people were confused, but because reality was experienced as shared between humans and other beings. Anthropologists like to call this animism, but that word feels clinical compared to what it really meant. It wasn't a doctrine, it was a lived habit, a reflex. You didn't have to debate whether the flame was alive. You bowed, fed, and avoided insulting it. The habit of addressing stars, fire, and wind as persons worked not because people lacked science, but because it fit the evidence of experience. Stars moved with intention. Fire ate and died. Wind laughed and raged. Why force them into silence when they behaved like anything but? Even the language revealed this collapse of categories. Breath and wind were the same word in many traditions. Soul and star were interchangeable. Fire and spirit overlapped. What moderns call metaphor was treated as description. To say the wind carried voices wasn't poetic, it was reporting. And this blending wasn't only mysticalite, was practical. Treating elements as beings made them part of social life. They had to be respected, appeased, sometimes tricked. Rituals of greeting, feeding, and mourning extended to the fire and stars, just as much as to human relatives. The universe became an expanded family, demanding etiquette on a cosmic scale. But family relationships always come with maintenance. If stars, fire, and wind were alive, then they could also be offended. They required offerings, gestures, ceremonies to keep balance. The next step was inevitable. Rituals designed not only to recognize them, but to keep them cooperative. Once stars, fire, and wind were recognized as persons, they became participants in society, and participants need to be appeased. Rituals weren't decorations added onto belief. They were etiquette. Just as you wouldn't ignore an elder at the table, you didn't ignore the flame, the stars above, or the wind moving past your roof. To do so was less a lapse in piety than a lapse in manners, with consequences as dramatic as famine or flood. Take fire. Across the Indo-Iranian world, Agni was more than combustion. He was the mouth of the gods, the one who consumed offerings and carried them upward. Feeding a flame wasn't symbolic generosity, it was literal. The gods would not eat if the fire wasn't properly tended. Zoroastrian priests protected sacred fires with near-paranoid devotion, covering mouths when they breathed near it, as if exhaling on the flame might insult it. Rome institutionalized the same courtesy in the cult of Vesta, where virgins kept the eternal flame alive, as though the empire itself would snuff out if the embers cooled. Stars received their share of attention too. Polynesian navigators didn't just observe them, they chanted their names as kin. In Mesoamerica, offerings were made during celestial events. Eclipses weren't accidents, but moments when the stars or sun demanded acknowledgement. In the Andes, coca leaves were blown toward the night sky, in thanks, carried by the wind to reach the watching ancestors glittering above. Forget to do this, and you weren't just careless, you were the ingrate who failed to acknowledge relatives guarding you from the heavens. The wind was trickier, because it could never be contained, only coaxed. Sailors across the Pacific performed chants before voyages, inviting favorable breezes while bribing away storms. Farmers across the Andes left food and drink at mountain passes so that gusts moving through wouldn't flatten their crops. In some European traditions, windmills weren't only mechanical rituals, were performed before their sails turned, a nod to the air's temperamental cooperation. The principle remained the same. If the wind carried your breath, you'd better keep your relationship with it polite. These practices weren't quaint. They were survival strategies dressed as social rules. Forgetting to feed the fire risked more than offense, it risked freezing to death. Ignoring the stars could mean sailing blind into open ocean. Mocking the wind might earn you a storm. Fear and respect wove together until ritual became routine. And these rituals always had a story behind them, narratives where humans, animals, or gods were transformed into sparks, stars, or gusts, explaining why the world behaved like kin in the first place. Every ritual needed a story, and most stories began with someone not knowing their place. A hunter, a child, a mischievous animal. They crossed a line, and the result was transformation. That was how stars, fire, and wind acquired their biographies, not as abstract forces, but as beings with scandals, rivalries, and bad decisions that locked them into their roles forever. The Greeks loved this format. Orion, the boastful hunter, ended up scattered across the sky, condemned to chase the Pleiades endlessly. Callisto, caught in Zeus's attentions, was turned into a bear and flung upward with her son. These weren't symbols. They were cautionary tales etched into constellations, night after night, reminding mortals of the cost of pride, lust, or simple bad luck. In North America, fire often began with theft. The Cherokee told how animals planned to steal flame from a jealous keeper. Birds singed their feathers in the attempt. Only Grandmother Spider succeeded, hiding an ember in a clay pot. That tiny spark became the ancestor of every hearth. The story lingered in ritual. Fire was never struck casually. It was coaxed, nurtured, treated as a being who once required cunning to obtain. The wind carried its own transformations. Among the Nahua, Ihikatal was said to wear a duck-billed mask, strange and unsettling, a reminder that wind was a god in disguise. In the Andes, sudden gusts were explained as spirits of the dead brushing by. To feel a chill was to brush shoulders with an ancestor, still moving through the world, but without a body to contain them. These tales stitched the cosmos into kinship. They explained why animals bore their mark-scorched feathers, singed fur, why certain stars shone in strange patterns, why fire had to be fed. Storytelling didn't just decorate the sky or the flame. It made them family, obligated to humans, and humans to them. And every retelling reinforced that bond. Children sat in smoky huts, listening to how the hearthfire once lived as a jealous treasure, or how the wind carried a relative's laughter. Each detail embedded manners, reminding listeners that they weren't alone in a silent universe. They were surrounded by transformed beings, watching, hungering, whispering. But the cosmos wasn't just narrated, was maintained. These transformations explained why offerings mattered, why rituals persisted. And even now, stripped of myth, the habit survives. People still whisper to stars, feed candles, and describe the wind as if it sulked or sighed, which leads to the persistence of this personhood. How, even in modernity, stars, fire, and wind remain stubbornly alive in human imagination. Scientific revolutions stripped the cosmos of its mythic wardrobes, but strangely, the habits never died. Stars, fire, and wind may now be charted in numbers, spectra, and pressure systems. Yet language betrays that the old personhood lingers stubbornly. People still murmur that the wind whispers, that stars watch, that fire devours. Metaphor, perhaps, but it works because the bones of myth never left. Candles at vigils carry this inheritance. A flame is lit for the dead, fed with wax until it flickers out, as though the person's spirit were briefly housed in burning light. The gesture isn't about illumination. Electric lamps would do it better. It's about tending fire as kin, a tradition older than memory. Every birthday candle ritual, every votive flickering in a cathedral, is the faint echo of priests once guarding eternal flames with the same anxious devotion. The stars, too, haven't lost their old roles. Modern telescopes may reduce them to nuclear furnaces, but in grief, people still say, "She's a star now." Eyes still tilt upward during anniversaries or loss, searching for constellations as though ancestors linger above. The Lakota's spirit road survives in quiet phrases like "gone to the Milky Way." Even astrophysicists, who know better than anyone what stars are made of, will admit privately that looking up still feels like being watched. As for the wind, it continues to intrude with personality. Politicians describe it as fickle, poets as jealous, farmers as helpful or cruel. A breeze through an open window can feel like a visitor, A sudden gust during a graveside prayer is taken as a sign. Science may measure pressure gradients, but it cannot erase the uncanny sense that air moves with intent. And it's not only in language. Ritual persists. Farmers in the Andes still leave coca for mountain winds. Sailors whisper thanks to favorable gusts. Families light fires on midsummer nights, as though the flames themselves need acknowledgement. These gestures survive not out of ignorance, but because they work on a human scale. They restore respect, caution, and a sense that existence isn't merely mechanical. What's striking is how these acts slip under the radar. No one frames them as theology. They are ordinary, even quaint, yet each carries the same logic as ancient rites. The cosmos is alive, and one should act accordingly. So even in a world of satellites and weather apps, the old instincts remain. Stars still glance down, fire still eats, and wind still sighs. We keep treating them like beings because, in practice, that's what they've always been.